Greetings, everyone. My name is Brenda Williams, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's podcast of Mothering Justice, Building the Next Generation of Mom Activists. And I'm joined today to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart and my own lived experience around caregiving. So I'm joined today by Omari Maynard, Shamil Dobbs, and Ken Whitaker. And we're authentically sharing and having just a very tender and candid conversation about what it's like to be a full-grown adult with adult responsibilities and caregiving. So Omari, if you could give us your story and how you're navigating through your journey of caregiving.
Yeah, most definitely. So my story is that, I am, again, the son of Elton and Dolores. I'm the father of Uriah, Anari, and Kari. My story is my partner, my children's mother, Anari and Kari's mother, Shamani Gibson, passed away in 2019, October 6th, giving birth to Kari. She passed 13 days after giving birth to him from a pulmonary embolism. The pulmonary embolism that, caused her death, we were days after leaving the hospital. We pretty much knew what was happening. We knew that, she was saying she was having shortness of breath, and, it was hard for her to talk and walk up steps. And, because the family's been in this maternal health space for a while, we figured that she might have a blood clot. We leaned on the doctors, we asked the questions, had personal cell phone numbers for, the heads of the department. And, the consensus that we were getting was that, she needed to rest, she needed to relax. And then even when we did go to the hospital, because it wasn't her 3-week checkup for herself, they said that they couldn't necessarily give us her the care that she needed, or give us the answers that we needed for her to see what was going on with her. And again, 13 days later, she passed away. So at this point now, with the help of the community, of course, I've been raising my children by myself and, navigating life of raising these babies, handling and managing my own traumas and grief, and building my business and foundation to help raise awareness around reproductive justice, around maternal health, around social justice and reproductive justice issues.
Thank you, Omari.
Thank you.
Shamil, if you could share with us your story.
Absolutely. I appreciated how Omari let us in, so I'll start in the same space. I am the daughter of Siebert Oswald Nesfield and Maria Elizabeth Nesfield. I am the mother of Sanaa, Soleil, Maya, and August. I'm the wife of Harvey, and I wear many hats, caregiver being one. Wife, CEO of a nonprofit organization, Michigan Community Resources, mother and caregiver, friend, lover, all the things. But in the spirit of this conversation, I think I want to sort of ground my story a little differently than I typically tell it. I'm going to tell the story of a man who is just magical. He's my hero. He is everything to me. He was my first love. And my father was always tender, always kind, taught me all of the things, all of the skills that you would want a man to pour into his children, especially his daughter. He taught me grace. He taught me about love for community, love for self. I can say unequivocally that he is part of the reason that I show up in the world the way that I do. He taught me to ask questions. He taught me to take no shit. But he also taught me to be a lover of mankind and to be of service. And it's in that spirit that I show up for him every single day. So roughly about 4 years ago, I noticed that there were some changes happening with my dad. It actually started at a baby shower, my baby shower, where he came in town with my mother. And my father never gets lost, never, no matter where he is on the planet. and rented a car, and myself and my husband spent probably the first hour of my baby shower trying to figure out where he had wandered off to. He was driving my mother, and of course I'm thinking like, this is crazy, like what is going on? Long story short, noticed during that interaction that things were shifting, things were changing. He got back home, and my mother, who was his ex-wife, called me and said, you need to come home. Home is New York. And she said, I want you to check up on your dad, just see what's going on. When I got to the house, I did not recognize my childhood home. There were boxes everywhere, unopened mail that dated back probably 5 years. There was excessive hoarding. There were just patterns of things that did not feel recognizable in terms of how he showed up. He was meticulous. He was neat. He was pristine. But, I was just like, man, retirement did a number on you, friend. So I'm just thinking, okay, let me just keep an eye, call some family members. But unfortunately, what seemed to be just some slight memory decline was the early seedlings of what I now know to be vascular dementia. Vascular dementia as a result of extensive, prolonged hypertension, high blood pressure, not taking his blood pressure medication, not staying attuned to a proper diet, diabetes out of control, suffered from multiple strokes, no one knew, silent strokes. Mm-hmm. And all of that started to cause decline. So I tried to put some things in place for him in New York, including activating my mom. And, for a variety of reasons, and a lot of it just had to do with his agitation and how his dementia was showing up. It became increasingly difficult to support him in New York. So I made the decision to move him here. And it was one of those things that I just felt well equipped to do. I'm like, if there's a problem, I can figure out a solution. I know how to make it happen. And coming from a legacy of caregivers, my mother included, who cared for my grandmother, my father's side, who cared for my other grandmother until their both deaths, I felt like I saw what it took to take care of someone. I know all the things. I understand sort of the medical aspect. So set him up here with an apartment and started to put things in place for him. And he began to rapidly decline. So this man that came and walked into an apartment in Michigan now is in a wheelchair, can't remember most things, can't feed himself, bathe himself, clothe himself, walk. There's just so much support that he needs. And I mean, without prolonging the story, I cannot begin to describe how much that process took over my entire life, because it was not only just managing his physical care, it was managing all the pieces and aspects of his life, from his home and finances back in New York to figuring out how to navigate and sustain all of that alongside the many hats that I wear. I'll fast forward the story to say that he has significantly declined, and I just recently made the decision, and it was a hard decision, to put him into memory care. But it was literally a choice of my father and the way that I was showing up for him and my own health. The same health indicators that led him to his decline started to show up in my life. High blood pressure, diabetic, diabetes, A1C out of control, all of those things. And I realized that it was a self-perpetuating cycle of caring for others at the behest of our care, putting myself in a situation where my children would have to do the same thing. So I say all that to say it's really about disrupting the cycle of how we think about it and being proactive in creating a different plan and orientation around care. And that's the space that I'm in now.
Thank you. Thank you for starting the story with the joy in remembering who our family members are, because they're still there.
Yeah.
Those memories still live. So thank you so much for sharing that. So Ken Whitaker, caregiver, father, friend, all of the things,
Yeah.
right? All of the things, right? So share with us a bit of your story.
Thank you both for sharing your stories. I continue to learn about myself just hearing other people's stories, because that's what connects us all together. And I was sitting here listening, to Shamil and literally adding things to my story that I never thought was going on. In the same I'll follow the same frame for what you Ken, husband to Shanae, father to Gabrielle, Alexis, Micah, Monique, Ken Jr., Dwight Jr., grandson to Bertha Ramsey and Burnett Ramsey, friend to many, multiple hats. I'm also the executive director of Michigan United. And before today, I thought I started my caregiving journey with my grandmother, and that it had been 20 years. But in talking to Shamil and Omari, even before this segment, I realized that it started 10 years earlier. I went off to college, Alabama State University. My mother dropped me off. She basically spent every penny that we had getting me there.
Come on, Mark.
I went on a full baseball scholarship, so she was excited. I really didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave home. My mother raised me, and I didn't want to leave her. But my caregiving journey started shortly after, when I continued to call my mom and she didn't answer the phone. And I called my grandmother, who I knew wouldn't lie to me. And I said, "Where's my mom?" And she three-way called my mom. My mom was in the hospital. She'd had a heart attack. She had had a heart attack shortly after dropping me off and getting back to Detroit. It took a lot out of her to get me to Alabama. And from that day forward, I'm constantly calling my mom, making sure she took her medicine, making sure she's getting the rest that she needs, calling her different friends, asking them to come and help. And I made the decision shortly after that I was coming home. So transferred from Alabama State, gave up my full scholarship and came back to Michigan so that I could be closer to home and be for my mom what she'd always been for me. At the time, my mother was also taking care of my grandmother, as my grandfather had passed, and I was helping her take care of my grandmother. So all of this just felt normal. So as my mom declined in health and she passed, I became my grandmother's primary caregiver. Same woman who taught me how to shoot a basketball, who taught me how to fight bullies, who was pulling bullies off of me until I could, kick them off me myself. Began to take care of her. It just started with having to cut the grass or go get groceries because there was no Instacart at the time. And that led into, having to wrap her legs during a pandemic, and going in and out of vascular doctors 3 times a week while being on Zoom calls, still trying to work at the same time, and kind of recruiting my kids to pop in every other hour. Eventually led to setting up cameras all over the house and even on the floor so that if she fell, I would know, and setting up motion detectors and having to think about, okay, it's been 10 minutes since she walked through the hallway and I don't have a camera in the bathroom for privacy's sake. So, okay, it normally takes about 20 minutes and I haven't, gotten motion in the hallway. So now something's wrong. I got to send somebody to check. Like going through, all of that and as Shamil, said earlier, kind of losing your humanity from having to care constantly for your loved ones. It kind of shapes who you are as a person. I said earlier that I'm a sandwich child, so I was taking care of my mom and my grandmother while taking care of our 6 children and my wife. We take care of each other. We both have autoimmune diseases that we tend to not take care of so that we can care for everyone else. And now 2 grandbabies that are, running around and calling us grandma and papa. So my caregiving journey stretches across generations, from mom to grandmother to wife to kids and, now grandkids. And one of our kids with special needs, so that added a whole new level of understanding of caregiving. Is, now that I think about it, the last half of her high school life was filled with seizures to the point where she had to leave school and be homeschooled, all while doing all of the other caregiving, different things that I forget about until I just listen to the stories of my colleagues here.
Yeah.
I've recently had to move my grandmother into an assisted living facility. It's very tough. Her income's too high to actually afford help. There's no such thing as a spend down when your income is 51 cents too high a month to afford care, but not enough to afford a $50 an hour caregiver on a 24-hour basis. You say, well, what do you need? What do you need? And I'm like, I need help. So, well, how much time a day? And I'm like, 24 hours. It's like somebody can't give 24 hours of themselves a day. It adds up. So I've had to make the hard decision to put her into an assisted living facility. But now we're preparing for her to come home, to go home. And whole new level of understanding and planning. But that's where I am right now. That's how I'm walking.
So I want to thank everyone, for setting the groundwork for this conversation today and, navigating the caregiving. But also, Amara, you mentioned something that I think we definitely, all of you actually did, is the toll that it takes on the caregiver. The physical, yes, health, emotional, spiritual, all of it. And so we hear so much in our lexicon, self-care, extreme self-care. But what does that look like when you are in a state of, particularly someone who is still here on this plane of existence with us, that has dementia, so that's a perpetual state of grief, navigating your grief and obviously the grief of little ones, but still being able to maintain physical health, mental health, spiritual health. What is some advice that you'd like to give caregivers around that piece of self-care?
I'm listening, brother.
Man, listen, I wish I had the answers. Like I struggle with the word self-care a lot because I feel like it's very hot button. It's super important, but I feel like for many of us, because we hear it so much, like it has to be a thing. Like and I just don't know what that thing is. So now to talk about what it looks like for me or what I feel like is important is what you're putting in your body. One, like, and I know for me, like if I get 6 hours of rest, like that's like, that's good. Yeah. That's real good. But you need 8, not even ideally, you need 8. So like starting with what you put in your body, just making sure that you eat right, vegetables, drinking water, like even outside of like, cause when I hear self-care, I'm thinking spa and vacation and all that stuff is important, but the day-to-day self-care is obviously what's going to be able to create space for you. So food, water, being active, and then just also I know finding time to create, like for me, like that's super important. I think it's really important for everybody, and creating can be many different things. Like for me, it's painting, but creating content, walking, talking, dancing, movement, anything that creates space for your mind to get out of the grind of work and everything else that you put time and energy towards, to where you can go back and create time for yourself, for your own mental, spiritual, physical alignment. Is super important, and it has to be something that's done on a consistent basis. For me, painting specifically, sometimes it's connected to work, and because it feels like work, sometimes I don't feel like doing it, but at the same time, for me, being able to just be focused on something and be able to pour into something and then getting in return something visceral is it does something to my spirit. That's important. So I would say those things: water, food, rest if you can get it, and creativity.
The teaching, that you never thought about self-care starting off with food and water.
Yeah.
And
It's real.
The very basic, right?
yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Amber. I mean, so much of how we talk about self-care these days, it is very jargony and tethered to sort of capitalistic norms of having to spend money to do things for self. And, as you were asking that question, Bahenda, it made me think about when I was in a hyper state of burnout and what self-care looked like for me. It didn't, because there wasn't even space in my day. My father required 24 hours of me, and I didn't even have 24 hours to be able to do all of the things that were required to live my life, much less care for him. And it created sort of this occupancy in my mind of how do I balance all of the things? And nowhere in that framework did I think about Shamil. And I can talk about it now from a space of sort of having breath and having rhythm, because I had to force myself to choose me. And it was less about self-care, and it was really about how do I create a meticulous practice that centered what Shamil needed first and foremost, and strip myself of the guilt of choosing me, putting on my own oxygen mask, ensuring that I had the things to thrive and survive, because I'm not even going to mince words. I was dying taking care of my father. I remember saying it out loud to myself every day. I felt like I'm dying. I felt like I'm dying. Like my chest was hurting, my body was hurting, my knees. I couldn't figure out what was happening. Everyone saw it. People would look at me and be like, "Man, your light is gone." And there was no headspace to think about what I needed, because all of the things that were necessary for everyone around me took up all of my time. So my answer to that question would simply be interrogating our approach to caregiving. And where do some of those things come from? Oftentimes we approach things by learned behavior. I approached caregiving intuitively, watching my mother to this day slave over a job, her marriage, all of the things. She never took time for herself. It was all about what she could do for other people. And she basically trained me up to be that way.
Yes.
Be that way in life, be that way in my career, be that way with my children, and most certainly be that way for my father. So when my father got sick, she was automatically like, you better, you need to. And I jumped right in, right? So it took me 4 years and some months, and I mean that, like literally in the last 6 months, did I make a choice to say, this is not working. Not only am I not caring for my father in the best way because I'm agitated, I'm depressed, it's causing me angst, but I am doing myself so much harm in the process. So, one, I had to think about what I was putting in my body. I was thinking also about the fact that I wasn't moving and taking care of my body. I was thinking about how I wasn't in rhythm with family, spending time with my children. And I had to create a different way of thinking about my time. And that was step one. I think step two was making, like I said, the hard decision to not be the primary caregiver, and having the privilege to be able to step back and say, how do I look at the assets that he has and make it work for him and for me? And that's a difficult conversation for most of us, especially for individuals that want to hold on to a family home, or, there may be tension points with other siblings around whether you should sell an asset, et cetera. But it was just like, no, if I don't do this, if I don't figure out how to get the support, put him in memory care, I will die in the midst of taking care of him. I think the last thing that I'll offer is that I had to change my orientation with work as well. So this was not just how I caregive, but it was how I showed up for every single thing in my life. Starting February of this year, and this is not a cultural norm in my organization, but I made it a norm for Shamil. I work 4 days a week. And it's not 9 to 5, 4 days a week. It's do what you got to do to get the job done. Fridays are sham days. I do whatever I need to do for me on a Friday, period. Whether that's sleep in if I can, whether that's, do something for myself. I had to find one day where it was just about me. And it was in that space that I was able to lose weight. It was in that space that I was able to reclaim my joy. And now I can show it differently from my father. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's super important that you name joy. I think that's something that, as those who are listening, to all of you here, I love that you bring it back to joy, taking the time on a Friday. In my own case, I do co-working at the house because I know that socialization is also because it can feel very isolating.
Yeah.
And so in order to still interact with other entrepreneurs, my friends, I said, okay, we'll do co-working at the house. Everybody bring a dish or a snack to share. So then that way, not only can I keep an eye on my dad, I can also have a piece of joy, have a drink at noon if it suits us. You know, wine is always appreciated. But I love that so far that, you know, naming the creativity, the basic necessity of water, remembering joy and reorienting yourself around work. And so, Ken, same question, how are you navigating self-care and what advice do you have?
Ooh, so I probably don't have healthy advice. Self-care, definitely a buzzword. Self-care for me revolves around doing nothing, because constantly moving, going, doing for everybody else. I really resonate with there being 24 hours in a day, but 24 hours isn't even enough to do the things for yourself, let alone someone else. I've recently, since, getting a chance to put my grandmother in assisted living, it's allowed me the opportunity sometimes to just sit and do nothing. I'll put my earbuds in and put noise cancellation on and block out the world, but there's nothing actually playing. You can just silence. I've realigned how I do my job. In the work that I do, everything comes with this sense of urgency. Everything's on fire. The world's problems have to get fixed, and you're charged with being a part of the solution. But I've taken a step back and realizing that if I lose myself, I'll just be replaced. But those who mean the most to me are the ones that are getting the least first. And that includes myself. So I don't move work-wise with the sense of urgency and everything being on fire as I used to be. And, I wake up later. I move slower. I go to bed earlier. Watching what I put in my body, it wasn't, a choice. Doctors had to remind me of it. As, I developed my own problems. Like Shamil says, problems start to mirror the ones that you're taking care of. Now I have heart issues. Pre-diabetic. Went through the same spill that they normally give everybody and said, you got to lose weight. And I went, wait a minute. I'm kind of underweight. What do you mean lose weight? And then realizing that I'm killing myself. Yeah. So watch what I've started to put in my body. Food. Yeah. I actually eat now. Water. I've traded beer and wine and whiskey, which I love whiskey. Traded it for water and sparkling water and, Gatorade. I'm an outdoorsy person. One of the best things that came out of being in the pandemic was my wife bought me a kayak for Father's Day. Because she knows I love to fish, and I hadn't fished. And I found it to be too much work to fish. And with my children jumping in to help take care of my grandmother here and there, it allowed me to just take a kayak out and just be by myself and fish. And, that spun into, wow, I got a camper for Father's Day.
Mm-hmm.
Had a pleasure of being able to take a sabbatical from my job that didn't take away caregiving, but it at least gave me a little bit of extra time and less responsibility to just,
Capacity was
to just attach a camper to my truck and hit the road, not really having a place to go except to just stop when I feel like it, pop up a camper and sleep and break it down and hit the road some more and just look for signs that I never thought about previously and see a little camper sign and pull off and grab a spot and camp. And so that's been self-care. And I haven't let go of being able to just get outside, whether it's a walk, whether it's fishing, hopping in a kayak, or just doing nothing. I lock myself in the bathroom. My kids know that when they come over and visit and they look around, they don't see Dad. They ask my wife, "Is Pops in the bathroom?" She'll say, "Yeah." I said, "How long has he been in here?" "About an hour." And that means that it's another 2 hours to go before I come out the bathroom. So self-care has revolved around doing nothing, taking 3-hour baths with Netflix and essential oils and candles and
all of it.
magnesium salts and stuff. So that's been my self-care.
Really.
And I want to center this too because, we're speaking here obviously as Black folk, and I think that there's things that are culturalized, like, it can be a little bit of a taboo in the community to put your loved ones in a facility.
Yes.
There's judgment, right?
Yes.
And seeing that child rearing typically will depends on the feminine, but then we find the places that we find ourselves. And Shamil, in your experience, first generation from an immigrant family, right?
Yep.
And then all of those cultural norms, expectations that are placed on us, even the placement, well, you're the eldest, and so this is where you fall, or your girl, or however we do the gender assignments of what roles and responsibilities look like. But we're in the middle of it.
Yes.
So you have to do some capacity building, adjusting, and whatever has gone in prior generations really has to go out of the door. So if you all could each share with someone who is listening that may be navigating similar spaces, how you have been able to redefine the narrative of what it means to caregive, the gender roles, especially the space that we're in. A lot of times we've heard some, and we do hear unsavory things about Black men and the way they show up in family. And then, of course, the expectation of Black women is that, as Zora Neale Hurston said, mule of the world.
Yes.
But how are we pushing back on those narratives in the name of self-preservation? And I'd like to hear from each of you.
Well, for me, just in terms of like elderly care, my grandmother, like she broke that myth in half. I remember my aunt, Aunt Sis, she was getting sick. This was around when I was in college. And my grandma was like, "We're going to put her in the home because like I'm not going to be taken. I can't. Like I've got life to live. I got things I got to do, and that's what we rode with because she was the elder. She was the matriarch. And, that really like seeing that and seeing it, but not necessarily being in the midst of all the conversations, but just seeing her do that and knowing that Aunt Sis was good. Like she was okay. She would visit, we'd go over there. So like it really put into my mind the perspective of just doing things differently. And regardless of how anybody feels, when it all comes down to it, is it going to work for you? And you being the person who's going to have to be the majority caregiver at the very least, So when my grandmother, she passed essentially almost a year to the date of Shamani passing. She passed September 26, 2020. And we put her in a home for a little while, but she was like, she wants to come home and, set up the cameras, did all those things, but she wanted to make sure that our quality of life was what we needed it to be, outside of her as well. So just being thankful for that, and wanting to make sure that, again, do my best to stay in good health so that my kids don't have to do that. And also, my mother and my dad, saying all this to say that, support is needed and it's important. And I know it definitely gets expensive, and it's not something that is always easy to maintain. But when you create a collective and when you exercise your ask muscle, it's you sometimes don't really realize what you can actually get.
Yeah.
Giving the opportunity for people to say no or yes, is up to them, but it doesn't happen unless you put yourself out there. As far as parenting goes, and from a single dad perspective, and I say single dad, as there's no way I can be able to navigate and do the things that I do without support and help from my community. I have a small family, but my my circle, they're supportive, and it's big, and they're supportive of me because of the things that I do. It's not like I'm like, I need help with the kids because I'm trying to, go to Vegas. I'm trying to go to Miami and get busy. That's not it. I'm out here doing real work, and because I'm doing real work, I get real support, I get real grace, and I'm just thankful for that. It's not this. But with all that said, the day to day it's a grind. But when it comes down to Black men and parenting, it's, even though from a propaganda standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, you feel from what we see on TV and what white supremacy culture leads us to think is that we don't take care of our people. We don't take care of our children. We want to do certain things. We're on drugs, and we want to sell drugs, and we want to party and do all the other things that are not supportive of family, but that's not the case at all. They've done studies, the CDC has done studies to show that Black men, Black fathers are the most active in their children's lives, and from me being and seeing other dads in the community, it's a real thing. When I'm taking my kids to school, I see the same fathers dropping their kids off to school. When I'm in conversation with men, it is about, pretty much being the chauffeurs, and taking the kids to whatever games, practices, whatever they need to be at. And then also, making sure that they're supportive of their partners. For me, because I'm manifesting partnership and I haven't had it for years, I've learned to, do the things that you got to do just because it needs to be done. There is no other choice. In order for me to be good, my kids have to be good, right? Those things coincide with each other. They go hand in hand. If I'm good and the kids aren't good, then I'm not good, so, you figure it out, and I think that we need to, one, have this type of conversation, and thank you for the question, just having this type of conversation more often and out loud, and getting men together to have these conversations in collectives. I have a men's group that I run virtually every other Thursday, 7:30 to 9 p.m. And it's basically Black men getting together and talking, and about our grief, about our trauma, but, more than anything, and it's intergenerational conversation, so it's taught me so much about how powerful we are when we are able to share experiences with each other, give a piece of ourselves, and then when that conversation is done and it's the next day and I need to step out into the world, I just feel way more empowered than I did the night before because of the fact that I know that there are other men, going through the same thing, but I'm on the right path because of the people who I'm associating myself with, and we all have the opportunity to have that but we have to also create the space for it and be consistent with it, and making sure that we're putting ourselves in position to celebrate each other, basically,
Yeah.
And that's what really helps me navigate my space with my children and specifically parenting.
Yeah. 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 It's a really good question. And, as I was sitting here listening to Amari and just sort of reflecting on cultural norms and sort of the weight and expectations, not just of being Black, but it's also being a Black woman who's of Caribbean descent. And I think about how we show up for family, period. And there's never not been a time where someone's been sick or in need or requires a thing. You bring them into your home. Your home. Your home is the place, right? That's the caregiving center. And I was taught that. I saw it. When my grandmother got sick, my uncle moved her into his house and created a whole living situation for her. I mean, that's what we do, right? And I remember when my father got sick, not only was it an expectation, it was an express demand of my mother. She was like, your father's sick, do not consider putting him in a home. And I think part of it was threefold. Part of it was her expressing her desire without saying it. Don't do it to me. If I ever get to the point where I require something, don't put me in a home. And some of that also came from a space of her working in the medical profession for years and seeing the quality of care in hospitals, the lack thereof, especially in some assisted living facilities. And she just had a deep fear of what would happen to him, what would happen to her. I think the other part of it was just the innate intuitive nature of when someone needs and someone's sick, you bring them in and you care for them. So I fell into that without any alternative. And despite what I saw happening, despite the fact that it took everything out of me and my family to operate what essentially became an assisted living facility next door, because it required grocery purchase, it required caregiving, it required bill payments, it required all of the things to sustain him being in this apartment walking distance from my house while simultaneously having to care for family, self, jobs, all of the things.
Right.
So when you ask this question of what advice would I give someone in a caregiving role, I think step one, and I said this before, I would really offer to someone to take a step back and think about how to create a plan for their approach to caregiving. Oftentimes when we're in a role of caregiving, we're doing so in the midst of crisis. It is thrust upon us. We are there, right? Someone's sick, they're in a hospital, and we have to make decisions in sort of a trauma mode. We're not proactively planning. We're not activating a plan that we sat down as a family and said, okay, y'all, when I reach this age, or when I become sick, or when I become older, or when I become infirm, this is the plan. We've written it out. This is the strategy. And that's you're operating from a different mindset when you can activate something that you've discussed. But when you're in crisis mode and you have to go, that's a different part of the brain. That's a different part of energy. We're operating in love, and we do things from that space without strategically thinking about the impact sometimes of our decision. So what I would say to someone is, if you have the opportunity, even though it feels like high crisis, high go, take a moment's pause and figure out, let's create a plan. Let's look at our assets, let's look at our resources, let's look at the legality of this, and let's think about medical decisions. Who has the authority to be medical proxy? Who's gonna make decisions around physical care, wellness, where our loved one is gonna live, how they're gonna live? If it comes down to having to make end-of-life decisions, how are we gonna make that, right? I think these are the things that we don't talk about, we just are responding to it in the midst of trying to care for our loved ones. I think the other thing that I would offer is that there are more resources than we know that's out there, and I've had to stumble upon them hook and crook along the way, from Area Agency on Aging, and again, not without its flaws, right? But I say all that to say, if you don't have the space to do it, how are you activating your community? How are you activating friends, family, and peers to assemble resources around you so that you're not in a silo. And being in this conversation is a reminder for me that having peers and folks that you can sit down with and say, I'm going through a thing, you're going through a thing, what are you doing? Like we were just talking about cameras and we're talking about how we're showing up for family. You learn so much from other folks in that space. And I'll be honest, for me, I felt so isolated and alone that I couldn't even pull my head out of the water to figure out who else was like me doing this. It actually took me posting a picture here or there, and I'm a very private person, of my father for someone to inbox me or text me and say, hey, Shan, I did this, or I'm doing this with my mother or my father. Let me send you this resource. Have you thought about this? Have you made this phone call? And it was building that small network that allowed me to become a little bit more at ease with the notion of putting my father somewhere. That was never an option. And I'm going to say that again. That was never an option. I would have taken myself out first. I would have died on the vine before I put him somewhere because I felt like I owed it to the man who was my hero. But then a girlfriend of mine sat me down and this gutted me. She was like, I want you to pause for a second and think. The man who loved you, the man who raised you, the man who taught you how to serve, the man who taught you how to live, the man who taught you how to fly and be free and spread your wings, would he want you to be living your life this way? If he were in his right mind and he were looking at you killing yourself, what would he tell you? What would he say to you? I mean, I broke down bawling, and I know my daddy. This is the father who told me when I was having tension points around making a college decision, my mother wanted me to stay, I wanted to go. He was like, man, go. Live your life. This is your life. And I had to think about his words in the midst of my perpetual grief of watching him decline. And it gave me a little bit of freedom to think differently about the approach and not be responsive, but to be proactive. And it started with saying, okay, you got to save yourself first. You got to think about what does Shamil need in the moment to have clarity. You're not even making clear decisions. Step one, you need a therapist. You need to talk to somebody. Step two, you need to go see what's going on with your body. You're here talking about your daddy picking him up off the floor. Literally, my father was and is 180 pounds. I am picking him up because he can't walk, lifting him up, tearing my back up. And it was going to the doctors, going to therapy that I realized that, okay, physically, you have to make a plan for self first, then make a plan for him. And it was in that order. I sat down with my doctor who helped me create a medical plan for myself to lose weight, get back on track. She encouraged me to get a therapist. The therapist helped me get a personal coach. The personal coach helped me create a plan for work. The plan for work helped me to create space around what I needed. The personal coach actually had another suggestion of interrogating some memory care facilities. And when I went to one and found the right one, it was all aligned. It was like, okay, this is what I need to do. I'm going to create a plan. And now that care plan is different from caregiving. When I show up to see my father, I am his daughter. I am not his caregiver. I'm his daughter. And he looks at me different now. We got ease when we sit down. We laugh. We talk. I show up around the clock because I'm not about to leave somebody's care in their hands.
Nope. Yes.
I'm at 3 o'clock in the morning. Let me go see what daddy's doing. And when he's sleeping, that's fine. 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm showing up. And I'm also in this space of gratitude for those caring for him because they're also human. So I send cookies. I give gifts. I make sure that I care for those caring for my father because I'm no longer the caregiver. I'm the daughter. I'm finally back in my rightful role. I am the daughter, and I'm caring for those who are caring for him. And now I have clarity of what I need and clarity of what I'm going to do with my children. I'm making a plan long before they get old enough to have to figure out how to scramble. This is what I want. This is what I need. This is what I have. This is what I don't have. I'm going to put the house in your name. We're going to create a plan. There are tools.
There are tools.
But we have to be proactive.
Care plan versus caregiving.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm gonna keep that.
Yes.
We keep it.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference between a care plan and caregiving,
Yes.
Yeah.
and just having a chance to be grandson and not
Yes.
caregiver.
And it allows us to still have the love, still do all the things, but we get to center ourselves in the midst of it. You don't lose ourselves.
Yeah. I appreciate the question. I appreciate each of your answers. For me, breaking that cultural norm of your loved one going into a facility, it took damn near killing myself. My grandmother said, I don't want to go to a home. I'm at home. If you have to send me home, send me to Laurel, Mississippi. That's home. All of my cousins, you can't put nanny, she's nanny to us, you can't put nanny in a home. And that lived inside of me even while I was receiving no help from any of them. And after a while, I started to realize that everyone saying, you can't put nanny in a home, are the same people who are watching me die.
Good.
I have been lucky that my grandmother, 101 years old, has kept the majority of her cognitive mind. And the conversations that I've had with her sitting at her kitchen table, something like this. What's wrong with you? Nothing, Nanny. You look sick. No, I don't. You gaunt. You lost weight. Oh, I'm working a lot. You need to sit down. You're moving too much. Like, I gotta take care of you. I gotta this. I gotta that. I gotta this. You don't have to take care of me. I can take care of myself. But you can barely walk. And it's like, I'll be fine. But then what really got it is that she told me, you have a heart problem. I said, what are you talking about? She said, you have a heart problem. You've always had a heart problem. At this point, I'm thinking she's just getting kind of, maybe her mind is getting to her or something. I don't got a heart problem. She said, no, you've always had a heart problem. And that I need you to take care of yourself. Don't kill yourself trying to keep me alive. I'm going to be fine. So I had been living to defeat the stereotypes around black men. Black men aren't there.
Yep.
Men don't caregive.
Yep.
So my whole life had been beat the stereotypes. So it's like, I'll be that. I'll do that. I'll say that. Whatever it is that you're saying I can't do, I'm going to do. And as I said before, I'm honoring her by caring for her. But when she fell, and I had to take her to the hospital and then have to listen to the different nurses talk about hospice and what hospice was, and I agreed to enroll her in hospice, and then the aide would come to the house, and I'd already gotten past the point of being able to talk about my pain, my traumas. So I was doing that with the nurse, and I found out that she had cared for her mother until she passed, and that she had damn near died doing it. And then she looked at me, she said, you're sick. I said, my grandmother said the same thing. She said, you're sick. And she said, if you die right now, what happens to your grandmother?
Man.
Your cousins aren't going to take care of her. She becomes some kind of a ward that she just hit the floor and stay there for 24, 48 hours until she passes. She doesn't deserve. So trying to break those stereotypes led me into beating the cultural norm with my grandmother, because she told me that I couldn't continue to do this. And that's how I found the courage to put her in an assisted living facility, even if it was just temporary. My mother raised me on her own, and she nurtured, and that's all that I knew in life was to nurture. From my first child, I'm like the primary diaper changer. I'm like, okay, express the breast milk because I want to feed. I want to feed it, to bathing and the cooking, and then just continuing on through life, just being that nurturing person, trying to defeat those stereotypes that, we aren't present. So trying to beat those stereotypes, honestly, is what led to kind of changing it. Because she said it. She said, I need you to live. And it reminded me, my mom on her deathbed, she made me promise, take care of my mama, take care of my grandbabies. Promise me, no matter what, you'll do that. And then I found myself sitting in my grandmother's kitchen making her the same promise, that I'm going to take care of myself, and that I'm going to take care of my kids, and that I'm going to take care of my wife. And I can't do that without making this decision of moving.
Yeah.
And I don't want to die. Now, the moment that, I wound up in the hospital, getting shocked back to life, is when I realized that it's time. It's past time. But in doing so, I've been able to get myself together so that she can at least come home to go home.
Yeah, come home to go home. So, on behalf of Mothering Justice and the founder, Danielle Atkinson, it's been a privilege to hear from each of you, your stories, your lived experiences, your wisdom. And as we close, moving forward, how has caregiving reshaped the way that you view life, the grieving process in general, and your view on death? And what are some of the biggest takeaways, as many of you kind of sprinkled that in throughout this journey, that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
So for me, I think that as a society, we need to stop looking at life and death as like linear. It's very cyclical. We as much as we don't want to see people pass, it's inevitable. As much as we want to look at death as something that is horrific at times, we need to make space for understanding that new life needs to come into the world. As much as sometimes we like to close the door on our ancestors, energy never dies.
That's right.
They're always here. They're always around. We can always call on them. I know that in my, and for my case, really learning about the ability to create relationships with ancestors was something that I've never really leaned into or even really knew about until Shamani. Her being the closest ancestor in my life that I've shared experiences with, and still continue to co-parent in a certain way, and knowing that the opportunities that were gifted to me and my family because of her transition and because of her energy here and then also as an ancestor is alive and present. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing and the way that I'm doing it if it wasn't for her. And we've talked about, so when she passed, we had a plan set in life of what we wanted to do, wanting to have more kids, wanting to create our business, or not create our business, but grow our business. And in her transitioning, those things at one point I felt couldn't happen, but at the same time, now 5 years later, I'm realizing that the plans are still being executed. I'm still running the play. The blueprint has been made. Our new child now is the Aria Foundation. That's something that we birthed together. and I continue to raise and grow, and making sure that my children also know that they can still create a relationship. They still talk about her all the time. They still, make sure that, whenever they're drawing pictures, it's me, the kids, and mom. Like it's and bringing it back to even art when we create. Again, like I said, making the pictures, but also knowing that when I'm doing speaking engagements, or where we're doing something for the foundation, where we're doing events, around maternal health, around reproductive justice, that they're there as well in the space, around community, in support of family, and knowing that, yes, your mother is not here physically. And, it's difficult for some people to hear children say, yeah, my mom died. When it all comes down to it, they have a way better understanding of the cyclical nature of life and death than I ever had as a 5 or 7 or 7-year-old. And I feel like that is super important, so my takeaway is to just for people to know that, we were gifted our family members. We didn't choose, we didn't choose the families that we were put in place with and aligned with. But it took so many. So from us coming here as, and this is my last point, from us coming here as enslaved Africans in 1619, it took roughly 130,000 people to make us, right? To have me sit here today, and in that vein, and the vein that energy never dies, our ancestors, we carry them wherever we go. That's right. They're always with us, they're always guiding us. And the families that we've birthed into, when we pass, prayerfully, our children and our children will still be able to carry our name and the things that we've contributed to this planet. And we need to always keep that in top of mind. I think if we do that, then we have a better understanding of how we show up in relationship with community, with other people, and know that our relationships are the bonds that we create now, are the things that will help improve the quality of our own personal lives, but also have our children's children understand the importance of what their place is in this world and how they can be supportive of others.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Oh, that's good. All of that. All of it. So if I had to build upon what Amari said and not replicate and duplicate, I would offer to the listeners, the viewers of this podcast and Mothering Justice, I would offer to all of the caregivers, future caregivers, to really be unapologetic about choosing yourself in the midst of caring for others. And I don't say that with the lens of doing something that's detrimental to your loved one. I say it from the space of ensuring that you have what you need to be able to show up as your best self in the process of making a plan for care for your loved one. I think the other thing that's really important to know, and this is something that I truly believe as Black folk, we are not doing a good job at taking care of ourselves. We don't know enough about what we don't know medically to even ask the right questions when we choose to go and sit down in front of a doctor. I remember going to several doctor's appointments and not even understanding my labs. So then I had to think about, who do I know that can actually explain what this means? What does my red blood cell count mean? What is A1C? What does that mean? Like all of the things that tell a story of what's happening in my body, but also tell the story of what was happening to my father. And not having that information and that ability to understand that information puts us at a huge disadvantage, not only for self-care, but to be stewards of care for our loved ones, right? I think about all of the medication reconciliation that I had to do for my dad. And had I not known the difference between lisinopril and metformin and hydralazine or carvedilol and nifedipine. I know all the medication to the point where when I go into these appointments, they're like, "Are you a doctor?" And I'm like, "Well, damn near now." Right? I'm a doctor and a pharmacist, but we don't interrogate enough around all of the things that, because again, we're in crisis, we're in trauma, things are being thrown at us, and we're trying to make decisions in that moment. So I would offer, again, in the spirit of what I've said before around making a plan for self, plan for our loved ones, stay curious, learn as much as you can about all of the things. And if you don't have the capacity and the bandwidth to do so, build community around you that can help support that, because those bits of information will help you to make better decisions, not just for your loved ones, but for yourself. I think the last thing that I'll offer, and I said it at the top of the podcast, is remember in the midst of all of this to choose joy, radical joy, because we forget in the midst of all this living and working and serving and stewarding and all of the things that life is for the living, and it's fleeting. It's fleeting. And as much as you can center the things that make you happy and bring you joy in the midst of your service, it'll make you feel good, it'll fuel you, but it's also how we're modeling how to show up in the world for our young ones.
Yep.
And I'll give you look at this last anecdote. My 6-year-old, I love her. Fire. I asked her one day, just casually, I was like, "So, Mommy's taking care of Grandpa. Are you going to take care of Mommy?" She was like, "Absolutely not." I was like, "No?" She was like, "Mom, you look miserable." I didn't even know she knew the word miserable. She was like, "You look so unhappy. You look sad." I don't want to be sad. I want to be happy. I want to go to Disney World. I want to wear princess dresses. And she's sort of rattling off all the things. And I was like, "Well, what if Mommy gets sick?" She was like, "I'm going to get some money. And I'm going to get some money and get somebody to help me to take care of you. But I don't want to do what you're doing because you don't look happy." And that hit me like a 10-ton brick in my chest. That here I am thinking that I'm doing the right thing, modeling the right thing, and all she's seeing is someone broken and unhappy.
Martyrdom.
And from the mouth of babes, it was yet another reminder to change my orientation with care.
Deep, powerful. Caregiving, honestly, has taught me patience, to slow down, to smell, to listen, to talk, ask questions, exercise that ask muscle. And to just find the joy in loving and exercising and displaying that love. Caregiving has taught me to be vulnerable, and I've modeled it for my children, and now I'm getting a chance to see myself in them, and that in itself is a reward. I'm getting a chance to see how their lives are changing, similar to your 6-year-old. My junior, he has to make a lot of money because he's not going to do what I'm doing. Knowing that now how he thinks about life and how his sisters thinks about life have changed from this experience is a part of raising them. But because I run a nonprofit, I can't get away from policy change. All of the different things that I'm learning from caregiving, the deficits that I'm learning from caregiving, just reinforces what policies really need to be in place for the aging, what policies really need to be in place for parents.
Yes.
And immersing my children and those that are around me that love me in what's really going on gives them the power to act and change policy.
Yes.
Because otherwise they would just be bystanders.
Yeah. Right.
And reach the point that I reached, that now it's a crisis
Yes.
to take care of me,
Yes.
to take care of my wife, to take care of their mom. So using what's going on as an opportunity to create that care plan, to use our current space and our history as a way of just kind of predicting our future. So my advice would be to set that care plan in place. Get the power of attorney together now. Now. There's no reason for your spouse, your partner, not to have power of attorney.
Absolutely right.
There's no reason for someone that you share life with not to have stewardship over your life. Learn what living trusts are.
Yes. Estate plan.
It's okay to plan a funeral while you're alive.
Yes.
My grandmother's obituary is already written. You know, the funeral's already paid for.
Yes.
The arrangements already made. Now I'm learning to do that for myself. So, like, my obituary is constantly being written and updated. Things that I've learned that I don't want to be laid upon my children or laid upon my spouse. You know, I forbid we don't die together. That would be my advice, is to use everybody's experience around you and your own experience if you're a caregiver to just make sure that those coming behind you don't martyr themselves.
Yeah.
Well, Omari, Shamil, Kenneth, thank you so much for joining us today. So many pearls. It's care plan versus caregiving. There's definitely been some conversation around not just in our lexicon how we consistently talk about general wealth in terms of the assets that we want to acquire, but as I'm hearing each of you speak today, generational health.
Yes.
Not just the physical well-being, but the mental health, releasing disruptive cultural patterns, and thinking about the living obituary, doing it now, and understanding that death is not the end, that it is very cyclical. Life is cyclical and precious. And so on behalf of Mothering Justice, my name is Brenda Williams. It's been a pleasure to be host, facilitator, and student today.
Thank you.
And I want to say my mother's name, who is now an ancestor, Bernadine A. Jackson Williams.
Ashe.
Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.